All right, so we're down to keyed hashing today. All right, and all right, so, and I just made some changes just a few minutes ago on these slides. I'll point them out as I get to them because the version on the website doesn't have them. But there's one term here that confused me, and I think I figured out what it means. So the point here is message authentication functions, which is some kind of tag you put on a message to verify that you know who sent it and that it has not been altered. And as I mentioned before when we did cipher block chaining, unfortunately, some people have used encryption for this purpose, which is not the same thing. So they would say, if you send a message and I can decrypt it, that proves it's authentic because that proves you have the key. That is not wise because it is not intended for that purpose. That's what a MAC is for. It is a different cryptographic object that does prove that you know who sent this message. And as we saw in cipher block chaining, you can forge a message which will decrypt even though you don't know the key, and fool systems where people have mistaken encryption for authentication. It's understandable why someone would think that, but in fact, if you want authentication, you should use a cryptographic object designed for authentication and not assume that some other thing is best for that. And so for this, you need a pseudo-random function, and we'll talk about the way these are designed. So a keyed hashing. Now remember, normal hashing, like MD5 and SHA-1, just puts a fingerprint on a file. There's no key, and therefore all it creates is integrity. You know that the file has not been altered if the hash is the same, but it doesn't prove who authored it at all. It does not give you any authentication. All it does is mean this file has not been changed from some previous condition. So a keyed hash could prove that because you have a secret value in addition to a hash. And so you have a message authentication code and a pseudo-random function. So the message authentication code, a MAC protects its integrity and authenticity with a tag, and the tag depends on the message and a key. Instead of just hashing the message, you also use a key, and so this proves not only that the message has not been altered, but also that the tag was calculated by the person who holds the secret key, and that is authentication. That's the idea. So they're used all over the place, IPsec, TLS, and SSH. All right, and 3G and 4G telephony don't, so an attacker can modify the packets. That's a weakness of the system. All right, so you do not want it be possible to perform a forgery. This is the basic thing. An attacker should not be able to create a tag without knowing the key. That's the whole point. That would be a forgery if I'm able to make a message tag pair that is passed, and the system is unforgeable if you cannot create a forgery in any conceivable amount of computer time. And typically, there's a very weak attack where you have a known message attack. They passively collect messages and tags and tries to find the key. So if that's the only situation where they can just watch this stuff go by on the network, then you wouldn't need a very strong system to survive that attack. What they typically do is try to make a scheme that can withstand a chosen message attack, where attackers can send messages, any message you want, and then get a tag, and from that can they deduce the key. And that's a stronger attack. And this is essentially what you have on, say, a web network. In a wireless network, you can send wireless traffic, and it comes back with a tag. So that's a reasonable case where this is what web tracks were like. So, of course, one fundamental problem is a replay attack. If you think about this equation back here, if I make a tag, all I have to know is the message and the key. So I could replay the same message and the same tag, and it would be okay. So that's a fundamental flaw in the system. It's subject to replay attacks, and to prevent that, protocols often add a message number in each message. So if you have a message number 10, and then somebody replays it, you will not accept a second message number 10. You'll only accept 11 or 12. So that's a way to avoid this, but it's not intrinsic to the MAC structure. It's something that you'd have to remember to add in a higher level of your protocol. So you need a random function, essentially. We often need these, a pseudo-random function. You need some way to combine the key and the message to create output that looks random. If there was any kind of pattern in it, that would be a weakness you could use to exploit to find the key. Key derivation schemes use these pseudo-random functions to generate a cryptographic key from a master key or password. And identification schemes use this to generate a response from a challenge. So they're common. So 4G telephony uses them to authenticate the SIM card. TLS uses one to generate a key material. So, all right, and so in order to be secure, your pseudo-random function should look random. It should be indistinguishable from random bits. And this would be fundamentally stronger than message authentication codes in principle. Message authentication codes, remember, the only thing you need is that it can't be forged. It's not necessarily true that it will appear random. So making it also appear random makes it even more secure. It's another security property that you may desire and have.
So forgive me.
Yeah.
So the pseudo-random functions
Yeah.
are stronger, are more secure than
Message.
the Mac because
Yeah.
they check the boxes of what did we say? Authenticity.
Well, the main thing about them is they appear random, and also I think because they also can't be forged because they appear random. It's implied.
Is it right?
Right. So
it's not a sum.
Right.
It's
So
that it's the characteristic of the indistinguishability encompasses authenticity.
That's my understanding. Yeah. All right. So you want to create a keyed hash for an unkeyed hash. This is typically what you do. So you take some existing hash function like MD5 or SHA-1, and then you add a key. You just add it to the message. You put the key before the message and just hash that combined message. That's one way to do it. That's the secret prefix construction. The problem is you'll have a length extension attack now. If I have key M1, if I have the tag of key M1, I can predict the tag of key M1, M2 because it extends it. And remember, the hash functions have this construction. If they are Merkle-Damgard hashes, like SHA-1 and SHA-2, then the hash function itself is subject to a length extension attack, and therefore this key is not going to prevent that because you put a key at the start, and all the additional chunks of message just go at the end. So that's a flaw. To fight replay, not to fight replay attacks. Dark is right. That was a while back. All right, here's another one, by the way. If you don't have some kind of delimiter between the key and the message, then if I have a key that's 1, 2, 3, ABC, and the message is DEF00, then I'm going to get this as the hash, but it could just as well be the key is 1, 2, 3A, and the message is BCD. That's strange. I don't know what part of this is the key and what part of this is the message. As long as any part of the beginning is the key and all the rest is the message, I have the same result, and that's strange. You don't really want that. So, to fix this, it would be better to incorporate the key in some more sophisticated way than just prefixing the key to the message. And so here's another way to do it. You include the length of the key, and then the message. That would help fix that problem. All right, another thing you can do is just put the key at the end instead of the beginning. This is a whole lot better. Now you can't do length extension because you know hash of M1K, so you could calculate hash of M1K M2, but that's not the tag. You need to do M1 M2K, and you can't get that from this. So just putting the key at the end makes it a lot better than putting the key at the beginning because of the common structure of these hash functions where they process only one block of message and keep adding more and more message to it, the Merkle-Damgard construction. So this compensates for the defect of the Merkle-Damgard construction. Now, of course, the other one, if you have a hash collision, then obviously there's a tag collision. So you should be using a hash function long enough that there are no collisions found. All right. So the HMAC construction is another way to do it. The secret prefix and the secret suffix are older, simpler methods. But there's HMAC is considered better, and HMAC is a little more complicated. You use the key twice. You XOR the key with a simple outer padding thing and an inner padding thing to create two keys from the first key. Then you hash the key and the message here, and then you take the key, this altered key, and attach the hash to it and hash it again. So there's two layers of hashing and two uses of the key. And this, of course, scrambles things around, so there's no way you're going to defeat this with a simple thing like a link extension or anything.
The XOR.
Yeah. And so you got OPAD and IPAD. In fact, you just use 5C. OPAD is just a series of 5C bytes, and IPAD is just a series of 3/6 bytes. Doesn't really matter. But the point is you somehow get two keys. And now this is going to be really hard to defeat with any of these simple attacks like link extension. And if you see this, so you feed in the internal state of the hash function here. That's what this H0 is. That's what I had trouble understanding. Then you use key times IPAD, you compress it, then you take that hash and hash it for the next block, and that hash and hash it for the next block. But here you have this one. So this part of it is going to get hashed twice, and this part is only going to get hashed once. And so this is a block diagram of what you do to create it. I found the equation actually easier to understand, but it's just a block diagram of the same thing. The thing that confused me is what's not visible here is the internal state of the hash function. And here it is, it's this H0. So, but that's the point. And the point is some part of it gets hashed twice, some part of it can only hash once. And two different keys are used, generated by the iPad and the OPAD. So that's a good idea. You know, the key is scrambled into pieces. So it's going to be real hard to find any pattern in this that you can exploit.
The key, the length is, doesn't add the length of the key as an initial
No, the
code?
key has to be no longer than a block of the hash function. It can be shorter or longer. Yeah. All right. So, and there's a generic attack, of course. If you have a hash collision, obviously, then you have a tag collision. So this is true of all these MACs based on iterated hash functions, a generic attack. So, of course, you can't use a hash function that is so short that you can find collisions. That's all that means. So you have to make your hash function at least 128 bits. Probably one of the longer ones, like 160 or 256, is even better. All right, so let's try a Kahoot. 7A is here. Oh, my volume's down. We got everybody. I'll wait for another line of the song and then go. In case there's somebody still coming in. All right. All right. So which system does not have a Mac? Process of elimination. Is it not projecting the questions over there? Yeah, that's how I was doing. Yeah, 4G is the one. I know these others are more secure. 4G was the one that didn't, so you could inject static on the line. Right, which attack is the most successful against a Mac? Oh, okay. This is clear. Yep, all Macs are subject to a trivial replay attack. You can just replay the same message and the same tag. So these others, you have to somehow get lucky or hunt through thousands of options, but you can trivially replay them. All right, which hash is not vulnerable to length extension? This would have been a good question last week also. That was the point of SHA-3. MD5, SHA-1, and SHA-2 all used the Merkle-Damgard construction, and SHA-3 switched to a different construction that no longer has the length extension vulnerability. That's one of the reasons why people might want to move to SHA-3. Although right now there's nothing wrong with SHA-2. In principle, SHA-3, of course, was designed in a better way. They wouldn't have bothered to make it if it wasn't going to be better.
But I think they made the vulnerability of SHA-2 as a criterion for the solution of which was a criterion for the acceptance of SHA-2.
It is, yeah. They wanted to. The problem is SHA-2 was a lot like SHA-1, so they said, well, we better do something different. So they made it different, and one of the vulnerabilities they removed was the length extension vulnerability. Yeah. All right, which one is vulnerable to length extension here? Secret prefix is the one. If the secret's at the beginning, then you can extend stuff at the end. So these others are not vulnerable to length extension. All right. Obviously, name will have to tell me who they are if they want their prefix. I know who the other people are. All right. So you can take a block cipher to make a keyed hash, and they call that CMAC. So you take, the compression function is built on a block cipher, so you give it a name like HMAC using SHA-256. Right, and so what you'll do is you have the Merkle-Damgard construction here, which we talked about before. You take blocks of message, you have an internal state H0. I slightly changed the wording here. That's the change in this latest version of the slides. I thought they called this an initialization vector, but it's not a random initialization vector like it would be in AES. It's just the internal state. And the internal state has a specification in the hash definition. I think it usually starts as just all zeros. So this is the initial state, then you feed in the message, compress it, and then you have another initial state, and you keep adding blocks and blocks to it, which is why it's subject to length extension, because you can have blocks of message and just add another one. So if I have this hash value here from M1, M2, then I can predict anything that starts with M1, M2 by just adding to this hash value without knowing M1 or M2 directly. So the Davies-Meyer construction uses a block cipher instead of a hash function. So you use the message as key. And so you feed in some of the message, enough to make a key. Then you feed in an internal state, encrypt it, and then you XOR the unencrypted and the encrypted value together to make the next new internal state. So the message acts as a key, and you have an internal state that's changing, and that will that's considered secure. That way you can just use your established encryption function to turn it into a keyed hash function. So that's CMOC, and so it's based on a block cipher. So CMAC uses only a block cipher, such as AES. It never got too popular. It's used in IKE, but it is another option. And then there's CBC-MAC. This was CMAC as an improved version of CBC-MAC. So you have your message, and you just encrypt your message with IV equals 0. Then you feed in your message as all these plain text, and I'm not sure what you use for the key, but anyway, you do a lot of blocks of encryption, and you just keep the last block. That's your hash, just the last block of cipher. You discard everything except the last block, which depends on them all because there's cipher block chaining. That's the idea.
So, but I'm understanding that the superior function is the CMAC.
I'm not sure it's as simple as one of them being superior. This is fine. I don't think any of them have been broken, as far as I know.
Okay.
They're just,
because here the word just simply simply by looking at the wording. You said CMAC was designed in 2005
Yeah, and it got,
as an improved version
well,
of
yeah.
CBC MAC.
Well, that was the idea, yeah. It was supposed, it was considered, it was hopefully to be better. I'm not sure anything was ever found seriously wrong with any of them, though, yeah. Anyway, this is another way to do it. The key we know is here. That's the secret key. Here's the message. You start with an IV of 0, just encrypt it and just keep the last block, which depends on everything. This is one way to make a hash function, which depends on both the key and the method. This is another way to do it. You can break it, though, if you know some of the tags of shorter messages for 2 single block messages. If you know the tag for M1 and the tag for M2, then T2 is also the tag of this message. Because, again, this is the problem with cipher block chaining that we talked about before. This XOR function here that takes a plain text and encrypts it and XORs it with a ciphertext means this operation just connects the plain text to the ciphertext in a simple way. So there are weaknesses, just like we were talking about last time. So from the tag of M2 is also the tag of M1 and M2 XORed with the tag of T1, because the XOR will undo this. So there's always, that's the problem with cipher block chaining. This idea of connecting one block to the next block with such a simple operation opens up some holes. So this makes it possible to forge a message under some conditions. So that's a weakness of it. So to fix it, what you do is you quit using the same key all the time. You use your key to create some smaller keys, K1 and K2, and you encrypt the last block with a different key. That's an obvious answer. That's how you avoid this weakness. All right. All right, and then there's CMAC. If the message fills the last block exactly, then you use K and K1. Right, these are using K, and here you use the other key at the last step. If padding is needed, then you use K and K2. For some reason, they do it that way. But the point is, you have 2 different keys, and the last stage uses a different key, and therefore you can't use one of these tricks to combine other tags to generate a new tag. All right. And then there's some more MAC designs. These use hash functions and block ciphers. Now, you might think that's not very wise because the hash functions and the block ciphers were not designed for this purpose. You're reusing something that was previously designed for a different purpose. Now, it turns out to be secure, but it's probably not going to be the most efficient. You're using something that was designed to have different security parameters, and that's what's true. You could make a faster system by carefully designing something for the MAC case that only has the security you need for a MAC and doesn't have the other security constraints of hash functions and encryption functions. And that's what happened here. So they created this thing, Poly 1305, which is designed to run fast on modern CPUs, and it's designed just for this purpose. So this is called a universal hash function. It's much weaker than a cryptographic hash function. It doesn't have to avoid collisions. Remember, collisions don't really matter because we're going to have a secret key. So you aren't going to know the secret key. So if the hash function alone has 2 messages that hash to the same value, it doesn't really matter because we're hashing with the key. So you don't really need to bother to make it that strong. So you only have one security requirement, which is that when you insert the key, you can't find a way to forge that. You're never going to have 2 messages that hash to the same function in the presence of a key. And it also doesn't need to be pseudo-random. The output does not have to be statistically indistinguishable from random bits. That's not really necessary. All you care about is that you can't forge the tag. And therefore, you can make it simpler and faster. And so here's a universal hash function where you just take a polynomial, various parameters times the key squared, the key cubed, and so on, mod p. You can only use the key once. If you use the same key twice, then it'll be possible to combine these 2 equations and get information about the key. So the key is like a nonce. But then that's one. Here's another one that builds a MAC from a universal hash function. If you have this universal hash function, then you combine a pseudo-random function and you can create a key using 2 keys and a nonce that's unique for each key.
Forgive me, sir.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
the previous slide, what was P? You had the polynomial,
Right, yeah,
modulo,
yeah, I think you just choose a number, a prime number. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Prime number.
Yeah, I think so, yeah,
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 I think
yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah. And so here you just have two keys. This is all you really need, and therefore it's secure if you have a universal hash and a pseudo-random function, and you don't reuse the nonce, and they're long enough so you can't just brute force them. So this is all you really need, and therefore you can make that's what Poly 1305 AES does. What was the background sound? Oh, that's the heating in this building. The heating in this building has very noisy pipes. We have steam heat like from 1910. So anyway, that's the point here. And like so many, every chapter in this course is the same. There's a standard which is good enough, and then there's an improvement, and nobody cares. Because the one that's good enough is good enough. So why would you bother to use the supposedly better one when it's a whole lot of bother and it doesn't really improve anything too much? All it does is save you a little computer time. So, Poly 1305 is probably what we should be using, but I think everybody keeps using the old stuff as long as it works. And you can't blame them. It's best to use the tried and true thing. So anyway, SIP hash is another one. Poly 1305 is designed for long messages. And you can, if you want short messages, you can use this thing called SIP hash, which is even faster and simpler. And SIP hash just has rounds of calculation. You input, I think C is, here's your key, and here's your message box. And I don't remember what C is. I think it's probably an internal state. And you just go through various rounds here, sort of like AES, combining them. And it turns out that's faster. I forget the details. But anyway, in principle, SIP hash is another way to do short messages and make a tag for them. All right, so here's things that can go wrong, of course. Of course, there's side channel attacks, right? You can measure the power consumption, the radio emitted, the timing, and it'll depend on how you write your code, and you might have data leaking out. So here's code you'd have where it's going to compare map to things here. And if a block of X is equal to a block of Y, you don't have to do a certain part of the calculation. And so part of, under certain conditions, this is what you write efficient code, it's not constant time. It'll be looking. When you try to XOR with something, it'll say, well, I'm XORing with 0, if so, don't bother. And that kind of thing will cause it to take a different amount of time depending on the structure. So the solution here is to write constant time code that always takes the same amount of time, no matter what the key is, no matter what the nonce is, that sort of thing. That's true of all encryption. And the other one, of course, is if you somehow get the internal state, then that leaks out information. And so theoretically, permutation algorithms will fail, but compression functions like Blake2 and such will not. So, this is how you rate them. You consider what might go wrong and how much that would hurt you. So these are extremely theoretical considerations, and that's why I say in practice everybody uses the old one that they know works, and the cryptographers invent these new ones, but they can't get anybody to care unless they prove something is really wrong with the old one, especially the government. The government standard will be the old one, and they will be very reluctant to move because there's established infrastructure of software and hardware using the standard thing, and unless the new one is a whole lot better, nobody's going to move. So, all right, so I got 7B. And of course, the new ones do gradually get into use. For example, when people are building Internet of Things devices and they have constrained resources, then they're motivated to use the new, more efficient thing. And gradually it comes out like elliptic curve cryptography is replacing RSA a lot because it's much cheaper. And so now everything has to move to post-quantum, though.
Have you ever heard or read or come across a paper, a research paper about... Actually, think about the paper. I'm looking
Okay.
for the resources. The question is about the resources, but let me reformulate the question. Is it possible that in order to maximize the security of a hash function,
Yeah.
of an algorithm, etc., I try to put all the ingredients that I know, and I may end up creating a more vulnerable result.
Yes.
Because I'm.
Yes, that happens a lot. People just try to do multiple transformations
Right.
to try to make up for not really understanding what they're doing. And for example, XOR will undo itself.
Right.
So two rounds of XOR is much worse than one. And there are other cases in which this happens. When you add more layers, you undo the benefit of the previous one.
So, for example, if I'm starting adding the or and the and, so it is, I have that possibility.
That has absolutely happened, yes.
So I really have to, whenever I'm thinking of, let's say, creating hash functions, I really need to think theoretically grounded and.
Well, for most of us, we just find one that's already there, a standard, that's appropriate and apply it correctly. That's what's recommended. What's recommended is to just use standard algorithms. Don't invent your own, because it's really hard. You know, a lot of work is going into those standard ones.
Oh, no, yeah. I was talking from a more theoretical.
I know, and if you're trying to make a new one, then what you have to do is carefully decide exactly what the purpose of everything you're doing is, and make sure you're achieving that purpose, like he's doing here. That's what the second half of each chapter is. The author, who really is a cutting-edge cryptographer, explaining how they invented the new stuff and why the new stuff is better than the old stuff. This one's a good example. They just reused some hash functions and encryption functions that were legacy, and that's not really the best way to create the new thing you want, an authentication tag. It would be better to start from ground and say, what do I want to achieve, and what's the best way to achieve that? But just reusing the existing functions was good enough.
Well, even because those are investment in money. I don't know the company.
That's right.
The R&D department also are experiencing budget cuts.
Oh, of course. And that's why efficiency matters. Many things matter. There's different considerations. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get started here. I think everybody's here that's coming. All right. So which one is a hash function that is not collision resistant? That's the universal hash function. That's the one used for the newest poly thing. It's good enough for a message tag, but it wouldn't be good enough for other hash purposes, like putting a fingerprint on a file. All right, what's the fastest for long messages? That's the Poly 1305. All right, the fastest, most modern method for long messages. Which one is best for small messages? Well, I think forever. It's a simple loop. Yeah. All right, so that's SIP hash. Good. All right. All right. Which one uses a block cipher, but only for one block? I'm not sure I like that description. We're going to see. CBC Mac. Well, it does use all the blocks, but you only look at the last block. That's why I'm thinking my description there is not as good as... Wait, Poly 1305. Okay, let's go take a look at Poly 1305. See if I understand. Uses a... Oh, I remember this. Remember the AES part here. It... Okay, it only computes one block of AES. It doesn't AES the entire message. It just takes a K2 and the nonce to be the AES at the end. So that's right, it only does one block worth of AES. It doesn't have block of all, the message is only here. The message is run through the hash function and then combined with an encryption of this second key in the nonce. So it's a little screwy, but that's true. It only does one block calculation of AES. It's true. All right. All right. Good. Stop the recording.